Monday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock time for Sports4CLE. Hope your weekend was good, Browns. Only a couple of weeks, and they will be in training camp down at the Greenbrier in West Virginia. Former Steelers defensive back and now ESPN commentator Ryan Clark with his thoughts on the Browns' 2024 roster. This from the Mina Kimes Show.
The roster is off the charts. Like, let's think if Nick Chubb is back to being Nick Chubb. Because I do believe sometimes the fact that he dresses like the uniform man that they put on the wall in the locker room makes us forget just how talented this dude is, how explosive he is offensively. One man never gets him down. Very rarely the first tackler puts hands on him. And I know this is like fantasy world, Mina, but I go back to Baltimore, Cleveland, the day Deshaun Watson gets hurt. And I was like, finally, you showed that you want to play and you still can play. Now, he's coming off of a shoulder injury, but if he's anywhere close to what they acquired him to be, that's all you need when you have Kevin Stefanski. And I think, and if I'm being honest with you, Mina, Joe Flacco makes me say this.
Yeah.
Like, to be honest.
Like, we have proof of concept. Like, all you need is competent quarterback play.
With that, let's welcome in Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. Fred, valid point. That's a very valid point.
I think they've been reading what I had to say or listening to you and me talk. I've been saying this, I'm not a Deshaun Watson apologist, but with this roster, they just need, average or a little above average play, I think, to even get to the playoffs. Now, to win the Super Bowl or go deep in the playoffs, they're going to need, better than just average play. But you got a defense that can hold teams down, and you got some playmakers out there, and this is no disrespect to Joe Flacco, but you dropped him into the cockpit of a good team, and he had time to throw, and he did what he does best. And, Watson has a little bit more, all the way around. He has youth over Flacco. He has mobility. He has the arm. Now, coming off the shoulder injury, that's a question, but I saw him throw a 50-yard pass to end minicamp. So, yeah, I agree with what they said. And you go back to, I think the key, obviously, is Deshaun Watson, how he goes. As so many teams, the quarterback play determines. But the Nick Chubb, Nick Chubb is at least one of the top 3 running backs, if not the best, in the NFL prior to the injury. And, what I've seen in the progress and what I've heard a little bit, even if he's at 80% of the old Nick Chubb, he averaged 6.1 yards a carry before he got hurt last year. And for a career, I think he's 5.3. Even if you, got 80% and you were able to get 4 yards a carry out of him, that's better than anybody else on the roster last year, So I think that, if anybody's going to be able to get back, close to his full talent, it'd be Nick Chubb. So, I saw a video of him hopping on one leg and doing some things. So I'm optimistic. I don't want the Browns to push him because they have everybody that was playing and plays him last year minus Kareem Hunt, but they went out and got Dante Foreman and Nyheim Hines to kind of split up the tackle to tackle with Foreman and the running and the passes out of the backfield with Hines. So I think they can afford to let Chubb get back until he mentally and physically is ready to go.
So you mentioned Deshaun Watson and kind of what we saw from him at training camp. Andrew Berry said that he's actually ahead of schedule after mandatory minicamp. Watson these days is on vacation, but he is not in any way slowing down, kind of letting everybody know that he's going to continue to do whatever he needs to do rehab process-wise as Watson posting some workout videos while he is vacationing, wants to make sure he gives that arm every opportunity to be ready when they get to training camp. And again, Fred, you see this, and it's a guy that's doing everything he can to be ready when they get into training camp so that he can assume the leadership role that he needs to.
Well, I agree. And as far as I've been around him now since he's been here, and, there's a lot of a national narrative that he got the 230 million guaranteed. He's just, doesn't want to get hurt and just wants to cash his checks and isn't worrying about it. He really has a lot of pride. And I think that it was designated or kind of shown last year. I believe that he was hurt worse than he let on. We know in the third game when he got hurt against the Titans that going into the Ravens game, he really didn't let on how hurt he was. I have to believe, and I don't know for sure, but I have to believe he told the trainers and everybody all week he was fine. He'd be ready to go. And then we all know what happened. He couldn't throw 10 yards in pregame, and they went to DTR, and he was way over his head for his first start against the Ravens. So I think that, and even against the Ravens in his last game, he didn't really let on. He stayed in the game with a broken shoulder and the high ankle sprain, played probably his best game of the year, took what the defense would give him and didn't try to do too much because he was limited. So I really think this guy has not mailed it in. I really think he has a lot of pride, and he wants to be in the talk of being one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL like he was in Houston when he was 3-time Pro Bowler in 4 years. So I think that that's driving him, and I think at times maybe he tried to do too much. I think he just needs to learn from even that Baltimore game last year that he's got good players around him, playmakers, and a good defense. He just needs to get the ball to the playmakers and come through when plays are needed to win games.
So this one's from ESPN.com. Executive coaches and scouts rank the NFL's top 10 running backs for 2024. They go Christian McCaffrey 1, Breece Hall from the Jets number 2, and Nick Chubb from the Browns number 3. AFC Executive, he'd be number 1 for me if healthy, even though I'm not sure how he's going to look. He deserves to be ranked high. AFC Personnel Evaluator, even if he's lacking some of the explosion in the short term, still has instincts and good feet. Hopefully that shines through and he gets the power back. He is such a good player. Fred, I show you that. I know you also have written an article for the Orange and Brown Report, your running back analysis, looking ahead at that position group. Take us through that article that you wrote for the Orange and Brown Report.
Well, the biggest elephant in the room is you don't know when he's going to be able to play. And when he comes back, is he going to be a 5.3 yards a carry back or a 3.5 or something like, less than himself? That's the hard thing. And I think with the way the schedule sets up in the second half of the year, it just seems like you want to make sure and maybe bring him along slowly, maybe just kind of like put him on a pitch count and bring him along slowly, even if he's ready to go sooner than later, because you really need him for the stretch run. Sure, you'd like to have him from the get-go, but who knows? I wouldn't put anything past him. A lot will tell when we get to training camp in 2 weeks at the Greenbrier. Will he be on the PUP list? A lot of us assume he will be, but I assumed Sione Takitaki was going to be on the PUP list last year, and he started day one in training camp and started the season. So, yeah, like I said before, same thing. Even 80-85% Nick Chubb is probably the best running back on the roster. I saw a ranking that didn't even have Chubb ranked in the top 25. So it's good to see one there. I mean, you can't argue with his talent. So the Browns know that. And one of my colleagues analyzed his contract. He took like a $10 million pay cut to re-sign with the Browns, and all his incentives to make that money back are in production. And he pointed out that he thought this meant Chubb will be ready, or his people thought he would be ready early in the season, because for him to hit all those incentives, he would almost have to play most of the season because the numbers were similar to what he has done in the past. And obviously, you can't do that if you only play half a year. I think I had him somewhere around 800 yards because I kind of erred on the caution that they would bring him along slowly and maybe bring him back towards the middle of the season. But obviously, it'll be a jump start if he plays earlier than later. But I just think with, the second half of the schedule, and I think 4 primetime games and all that, and that's your playoff push, your stretch drive. It would just be such a boost in the arm for the Browns to have the return of Nick Chubb, at some point, as opposed to, not saying it wouldn't be a big deal to have him to start the year, but you can just see the lift when he returns, whenever that will be.
Yeah, and the other thing is I think they've protected themselves pretty well. You've got Ford, you've got Foreman, you've got Himes. You have a number of options with guys that do different skills, that have different skill sets that they can use.
Yeah, Pierre Strong, he had one of the best yards per carry in the limited time that he played. So you have, like I said, they let Kareem Hunt go, but Dante Foreman and Nyheim Hines kind of, I think, absorbed that role. So even if you go into the season without Chubb, you have Foreman, Hines, and Ford, who had just under 1,000 yards, was pretty good in his own right, and Pierre Strong. So you have your 1 and 2 backs returning. Well, outside, I'm not discounting Kareem Hunt. He had a lot of touchdowns, but he only averaged 3 yards a carry last year, which was like the lowest in his career.
Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. Now I'm going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports for CLE. I'll be right back. Stay with us.
Can you believe this new $1,000 tax-free scratch-off? $18,000, $1,000 winners? Another winner? Good thing I brought my check writing pens. You know what else is winning? My carpal tunnel syndrome. Wouldn't it be great for these guys if they could cash their tickets in online?
They can, with the Ohio Lottery app.
What? That's great! Wait, what's an app?
Attention shoppers, the Ohio Lottery's $1,000 tax-free $20 scratch-off is your best chance ever to win $1,000. And yes, you can cash it in online.
We continue talking Browns with Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. Let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hi, this is Rico. I was just thinking about the AFC North division as a whole, how extremely difficult on paper it will be to win it. This division has the MVP, the Defensive Player of the Year, the Coach of the Year, the Assistant Coach of the Year, and had Flacco as the Comeback Player of the Year. Then 2 coaches that are highly regarded as the best in the league, and also 2 out of the top 3 running backs over the past few seasons. This division is absolutely loaded, but our Browns have to win the division. It's downright embarrassing that this franchise has a big, fat 0 next to their name when it comes to division titles. It's time for the Browns to win the North. Thanks. Go Browns.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Fred, I think one of the reasons they've struggled is the consistency. Look at the consistency, and the caller alluded to it with Tomlin and Harbaugh.
Well, that's what the Browns are, trying to establish by, extending Barry and Stefanski. You've had them together going in their 5th year now. And that's also in the division. Zach Taylor, I think now the Bengals and their GM have been together, and you put Tomlin and Harbaugh, it's a stable division. And, it's not the same analogy, but I covered the Cavs the 4 years with LeBron when they went to the finals with Golden State. And I would argue that was the best. Those were the best 4 years, the best Cavs team in history, in NBA history for the Cavs, and maybe even close to one of the best teams in the NBA. But you had the Warriors that were maybe the best all time during that time. That, if you had kind of what you have going on now in the NBA with that roster, the Browns or the Cavs probably would have won 2 or 3 titles. So with that said, yeah, the division, the Browns haven't won the AFC North since it's been titled the AFC North. I think since 1989. And it is tough. But we know before it was futility. Right now it's because it's good. There's a reason HBO put Hard Knocks in this division, because you got 4 really strong teams, and you could stack them up and make a case 1-4. Any one of the teams could win the division. Any one of the teams could get last place. They play 6 games in the division, and that is so important, To win the AFC North, you get a home field advantage. And think last year, if the Browns would have, they only came 1 game from being tied with the Ravens. You can make the case in that 4th game when they played DTR, they would have beat the Ravens there, and everything else played out. They would have been tied with the Ravens, and I think they might have got the tiebreaker. If you would have had a home and had a bye, and the Texans would have come in after playing the first game, who knows what could have happened? You still might have lost, but you've been playing at home, and that team was 8-1 last year, and they were a different team last year, the defense at home. So that's why it's so important to win the division. And I'll say it again, you have to win those games. You have to at least be 4-2, in my opinion, in the division to win the AFC North. And a lot of those games this year are going to be in the second half of the season, down the stretch. And that's when you want to be playing your best. You want Watson to be playing his best. You want, Nick Chubb to be playing his best. And so you want your best players playing at that time. The Bengals were kind of default out of it because of their injury to Joe Burrow. And the Steelers didn't have great quarterback play. They went out and feel they've remedied the situation. Joe Burrow's healthy, and now Deshaun Watson's healthy. So, it's incumbent on them to try the tightrope of staying healthy. But I agree with the caller. You want to win your division. I mean, it sets you up. That's why the NFL did the playoffs the way they do. You get in as a wild card, you're on the road, and you just got to be hot at the right time.
All right, so this is from PFF. Building the perfect AFC North using PFF's position rankings. So this is from PFF. The quarterback, they go Lamar Jackson. The running back unit, the Ravens. Wide receiving core, the Bengals. Both the offensive and defensive lines, they go the Browns. Linebacking unit, the Ravens. Secondary, they say the Ravens. I would argue I'd rather have the Browns secondary than the Ravens. And I know they have Kyle Hamilton. I'll still take the Browns secondary unit. But be that as it may, shows you the respect both lines. And you usually win football games at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, that's what they talk about. The games are won or lost in the interior line. The Browns' defensive line didn't sit on their laurels. They went out, especially in the interior, where they felt like they needed more depth, and they added, Quentin Jefferson, who had 6 sacks, and Michael Hall. Those are both interior presence rushers, and they feel like those 2 guys can push the pocket and free up Myles Garrett and Zadarius Smith and Okoronkwo all the more, and help with the rushing game by re-signing Shelby Harris to go with Tomlinson and Maurice Hurst as well. So, I like what they did there. I feel good about their defensive line, and they have some depth. And offensive line, the biggest thing last year was the injuries. You lost your top 3 tackles. I don't know how any team loses their starting left and right tackle for the season with knee injuries, and then your backup, you lose him with a knee injury. So you lost your top 3. You're playing the majority of the season with your 4th, 5th, 6th offensive tackles. And we all know Joe Bitonio was a little banged up most of the season. And, so you really only had 2, healthy offensive linemen. So, yeah, they got a little age to them, but they are, I think, playing at the peak. And that's one of the reasons you have to take advantage of what you have right now with this roster. I think the secondary's strong. And I think JOK is the equalizer at linebacker. I mean, the kid had 20 tackles for loss. Think about that. That's more tackles than many players have. And he was just shooting gaps. And I think he's going to be as good, if not better, this year. So I'm not too worried about the linebacking group. But in the secondary with the corners and even healthy safety. So I think the defense will be fine. You just need to stay healthy all the way around and, on offense, pound the ball. And I'm not taking anything away from Derrick Henry, but Derrick Henry, the Browns held him to 22 yards when they played the Titans last year. I think Nick Chubb can do every bit, even if he's not 100%. So, yeah, I mean, it will be interesting, but it's good to see the Browns, are ranked a little in there, but you gotta win in the trenches in this game.
So before we go to break, do you think Myles Garrett can, and I know you did an edge rusher analysis, an article for the Orange and Brown Report, can Garrett repeat as Defensive Player of the Year, do you think, in 2024?
I think he can, but, I talked to him in the mini camp. I think he's one of the last people we talked to, and he said, he used to always talk about that, I want to be Defensive Player of the Year. I want to be. He's changed his tune, and I think a lot of that's maturity. He said, my number one goal is to win the Super Bowl right now. And I think that mindset, last year he didn't talk about it either, and he won it. I think the defensive play, if the defense plays as well as they did last year, it only makes sense that one of your contributors, get that. Zadarius Smith talked about, he said, hey, maybe he gets it, but maybe another one of us gets it. Maybe it's JOK or somebody else. And so I think he can get it. You look last year, he didn't have his best year in sacks, 14. I mean, he'd been getting more than that in previous years and didn't get it. So I think it's, as the team goes, that's how the awards go. And I think, you can see it with the Guardians. They have 5 on the All-Star team. And some of them are guys that aren't well known, but because their record is the top in the American League or near the top, you get spoils for having success. So I think that's where it goes with Myles. They win the division, go the play. I think, yes, it's in store for them.
Fred Greetham, Senior Analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. Now I'm going to step aside, take one more time out. Other side of the break, we'll turn our attention to the offensive line. Sports for CLE. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Fred Greetham, Senior Analyst from the Orange and Brown Report. Take a look at this. This is the oldest offensive line unit groups in the NFL in 2024. 49ers are the oldest. Lions are second, and the Bengals and Browns are tied for third. So, Fred, I know you've written an article. We'll break it up into interior and the tackles. The guards, the interior of that line is what's kind of a little older, if you will, a little long in the tooth with Bitonio and Teller.
Yeah, and Conklin's 29. He'll be 30 in August, I think mid-August. So, I mean, you look at it one side, you got a lot of experience in there and guys that work well together, that play together. But I think they are mindful of that. Last year, Joe Bitonio was kind of on autopilot. He's kind of almost like the Joe Thomas. I think Joe retired after 10 years. This is the 11th year for Bitonio, and last year he was the stage where often he didn't practice most of the week. He had nagging ailments earlier in the year during the bye. He had like a scope on his knee. He did miss a game, but he was back within 2 weeks. But he would not practice for the most part all week. You'd see him on Friday, and then he'd play on Sunday. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same way this year. He wasn't really even in the rookie mini camp participating. They know what they have with him. But you saw him go out and get Zach Zinter from Michigan with their third round pick. I really think he's a plug and play guy. I think that they feel he can be kind of like a DeJuan Jones, that playing at the Big Ten with a national championship team, being a key anchor. Here's a guy that could step in if Teller or Batonio go down, or one, retires or moves on after this year. So I like what they did there. And then, like you said, at the tackles, you got DeJuan Jones. We saw what he did last year as a rookie. You really feel like he should be able to step in and play. You hate to put him back on the bench, but with Jack Conklin declared on his Instagram, we haven't got anything from the Browns, but he said he was back. He thanked his wife. So that told me that he's cleared. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he starts training camp. We didn't really see him in mini camp or the off season, so we didn't really know. There was no updates. So we'll see how he starts. But yeah, there's some age. But as we know, offensive linemen can go into their 30s. I think Andrew Berry is addressing the situation, and he has the last 2 years. He got Luke Whippler, young second-year guy from Ohio State, DeJuan Jones, second-year guy from Ohio State, and now Zinter, a rookie from Michigan. And don't forget about Jedrick Wills. Everybody's ready to write him off. He's going into his fifth-year option, and yet, what is he, 25? Yeah, he just turned 25, I believe, in May. So, even if he's not a top 10 tackle, if he's middle of the road, they have to make a decision on him. They're going to assign him to an extension, but he's only 25 years old. And unless you have a replacement that is better right now, then you don't move on from him. And jury's out on what you're going to do with James Hudson. He's only played 4 years. So you got some youth, and you brought in a couple guys that undrafted. Javian Cohen is a guard. He was preferred, kind of what I would say, signing. I think they gave him some guaranteed money to come in. So you could have Zinter and Cohen, your future guards. Posick's, in the middle of a contract. So I think they're addressing it. But right now, you have Teller, you have Batonio, two perennial Pro Bowl guards, and hopefully you can get a big year out of both of them.
All right, before I let you go, when you look at the wide receiving room, and I know you've done your analysis and projections, what do you see when you look at wide receiver here?
Well, obviously the big question's Amari Cooper. I'm pretty confident they'll get something done with him. They know how important he is, and I would think that they would get something done before training camp. I don't think they want something to fester. There's big fines for every day you miss. I think it's somewhere around $50,000 a day. He just seems like not the type of guy to hold out, but I think that they'll get something done. But with that said, he's the key because, you got Jerry Jeudy, who was probably your biggest offseason move, but you signed him to an extension based on potential. He didn't really have a breakout year, in my opinion, with the Broncos. So they signed him to get ahead of the market and on his potential. They like what they see of his skill set in this choice route, yards after catch type of offense. And Elijah Moore, you hope he builds on last year. It was his best year in the NFL, but still maybe wasn't a breakout year all the way around. Beyond that, you got Cedric Tillman. You're really hoping he becomes, if not the third receiver, your fourth. They like him a lot. And then you have guys like David Bell and this year's draft pick, Jamari Thrash battling for that 5th spot. So I still would like, wouldn't mind seeing a veteran that's been there, done that coming in. And I think after they get to training camp, you might see that if they don't feel like, what they have on the roster is ready to make an instant impact. There's not a lot of guys out there, but there's some, late 20s, early 30s guys you could bring in on a 1 year. I know Michael Thomas is still available, former Ohio State Buckeye who has been injured the last few years, but what's it hurt, to bring somebody like that in? But I know they want to see what they have in the young guys. So I think the key is Amari Cooper, but you really need to get something behind him. So teams just can't shut down Cooper, and make Judy or Moore or whoever, Tillman, beat him.
Fred Greetham, a senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report, as always. Great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Fred.
Always great to be with you, Dick. Thanks for having me.
Fred Greetham, make sure you read him. Orange and Brown Report senior analyst, always really good stuff and insightful analysis of the Browns and their roster. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We continue talking Browns. Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com, straight ahead. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free. We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. This is from ESPN's First Take. Courtney Cronin, expectations for Deshaun Watson in 2024.
The Browns have so much at stake here, and I'm talking about a team that went to the playoffs last year with Joe Flacco as their quarterback after Watson was put on season-ending injured reserve. For Watson to live up to the expectations that he can still be that guy that was in Houston in 2020, leading the league in passing, setting career high in completion percentage that year, does that guy exist anymore? Because we really don't know if that version of Deshaun Watson was something that, because of a lot of different reasons, is in the past, or if he's still that quarterback that the Browns thought they were getting when they decided to pull off this trade, which, by the way, we talk about the money a lot. Let's not forget 3 first-round draft picks they gave up, the 3rd rounder in 2023, and there's 2 4th-rounders in there. That's a lot of draft capital that the Browns shipped out on top of the money. And it's not just Deshaun Watson that has a lot riding on this season. There are jobs on the line in Cleveland if this experiment doesn't pan out the way that they had hoped. And the glimmer of hope I think that you have here is knowing that he's healthy now. He had the offseason shoulder surgery, ended up playing through that in the game that might have been his best game last year, was where against Baltimore. I want to see that version of Deshaun Watson more often. The Week 10 game, which was the last time we saw him, like a horrific first half, and then in the second half, something clicks. And it wasn't like he just flipped a switch, but 14 completed passes, about 150 yards passing, and a touchdown to come from behind and win. That version of him seems to still be there, but can we see it on a 17-game basis? I'm not so sure just yet.
With that, let's welcome in Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Tim, I think Courtney argued herself in a circle there. 2 things. Deshaun Watson was injured, and nobody's job is on the line. They just signed extensions.
Yeah.
Other than that, sure.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski just signed extensions. They're not going anywhere unless this thing completely falls apart. And when I say completely falls apart, I'm talking 2 or 3 wins, which pretty much doesn't seem like it's going to happen this season. But I think what she's basically saying is obviously true, that we've barely seen Deshaun Watson the last 2 seasons. He's played in a grand total of 11 and a quarter games out of a possible 35. And again, that's regular season and playoffs combined. So we're talking not even a third of the potential games available to Deshaun Watson he's been able to play, and had that 11-game suspension in 2022, of course, then missed 11 full games because of injury. So we really still don't know what Deshaun Watson is. And we saw glimpses of it in 2023 more than we had in 2022. You look at the Titans game, the Cardinals game. Courtney obviously mentioned the second half of that Ravens game, where really that's the best we've ever seen Deshaun Watson since coming over to Cleveland. But again, it's we've talked about it a bunch, is can he stay on the field consistently? Can he get 5, 6, 7, 8 games in a row under his belt? Because I think once he does that, that's when you can see the game kind of start to slow down, him develop more consistency, more rhythm, timing with his receivers, understanding his offensive line. Those are things that you really only can develop by being able to stay on the football field. It just comes down to him understanding how he has to protect himself better and try as best he can to avoid taking as many big hits as he did in 2023.
Yeah, and again, I think he was hurt more so than he let on at the very beginning, with the shoulder and those kind of things. So this is concerning without question. Highest rate of red zone incompletions due to inaccurate passes in 2023. Deshaun Watson was number 1 in the league, and ahead of some guys you don't want to be mentioned in the same breath as quarterback-wise. Mac Jones. So Watson had 60% that were inaccurate passes as a result of him. Mac Jones was 50, Josh Dobbs 45, Sam Howell 42, along with Gardner Minshew and Daniel Jones 40%. So 2 things. I go back to, I think he was banged up significantly more going back, to when he missed the first Ravens game and DTR had to start. And 2, I think they were asking him to do some things that he can do but aren't his strengths. So that's why I think you're seeing the overhaul to the offense. They're going to ask him to do things he does well. That is what you should do.
Yeah, that's smart. That's modern sports strategy, is, putting your players in their best position to be successful and tailoring what you do well to match what your great players do well and what your most important players do well. I think that's just smart coaching, and that's why you see the smart teams doing that and more teams doing that. But when I look at that tweet from Warren Sharp, obviously he does some great analytical stuff. One thing I do have to point out, it's a very small sample size we're talking about here. We're talking about guys that have thrown 400, 500, 600 passes last season. Deshaun Watson threw 170. In the red zone, he threw 19, and he had a total of 5 incompletions in the red zone. 5. So we're talking 14 of 19 in the red zone for 6 touchdowns. So he had more touchdown passes in the red zone than incomplete passes in the red zone. Now, if it were, he threw 100 passes in the red zone, and say he was only about 68% and he missed 60 of them because he was inaccurate, we're having a different conversation. But we're talking about 3 out of 19 passes he threw were missed because they were inaccurate. I think it just to me, that's just extrapolating out of a very small, minuscule sample size. And that's maybe a case where numbers lie and you have to add more context into it. That's why you see so many times in stats that it's compressed to a large number. We're talking maybe 300, 400 passes. And Deshaun Watson, even looking at last season, threw a grand total of 171 passes. That's 39th in the NFL. Guys like Tommy DeVito and Easton Stick last season threw more passes than Deshaun Watson. So, again, I think context does kind of matter there. That's why I would take that with a large grain of salt.
Yeah, that is a fair assessment, without question. All right, this from CBS Sports. Underappreciated players on each AFC team. For the Browns, they say Amari Cooper. Cooper is probably the most high-profile player on this list. There's a case to be made he slept on when talking about the top receivers in the league. Despite the Browns starting 5 different quarterbacks last year, 30-year-old wideout put together a career year hitting a high of 1,250 yards receiving, which had him inside the top 10 in the league. I would say he might be one of the most underappreciated teams in the NFL, or players in the NFL, not only on the Browns. All he does is produce. That's why they got to find a way to make him happy.
Yeah, I would have to imagine they're going to, because I mean, when you look at the production he has, I mean, 2,400 yards in 2 seasons, 14 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons with the Browns. I think since coming to Cleveland, it seems like he's got maybe people starting to realize he's actually really, really good. And the fact that he's done it, considering the quarterbacks he's played for outside of Deshaun Watson, we're talking Jacoby Brissett, Joe Flacco, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, PJ Walker. The fact that he's had this rotating cast of quarterbacks for one reason or another, and he's still been able to produce top receiver numbers, goes to show that he's obviously one of the better receivers in football. Maybe like we kind of said, maybe he gets slept on because he's not the flashiest. He doesn't have the speed of Tyreek Hill and Jamar Chase. He's not making tremendous one-handed catches and doing all these different acrobatic things. He's just a very smart, sound, fundamentally talented receiver who knows how to get open. It may not be the flashiest thing, but there's substance to Amari Cooper's game. Maybe he's more substance than style, and it's clear when you look at the numbers. He's a clear number one, and so the Browns have to do what they can to keep him. Even if it's just for a couple more seasons to maximize what kind of prime he has left.
So this also from Warren Sharp. Teams win 64% of the games which they score first. So obviously they lose 36% when allowing the opponent to score first over the last 10 years. This is the number of games teams have scored first in the last 2 years. Number 1, Ravens and Eagles, 23. Tied for third, Browns, 49ers, and Lions with 22. And sixth is the Cowboys, 21. What that doesn't show is the turnovers, which we know the Browns have had one of the most turnovers in all of football. And it skews to something like 70% if you win. And the Browns have done that. But it goes to show you, those scripted plays that the offense runs well, they matter.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Kevin Stefanski's strengths. One of them is he usually seems to have a great plan to start a football game, and it's clear when you look at that stat. 22 games out of 34 in the last 2 regular seasons they've scored first. That tells you Stefanski has got a good plan coming in. That's pretty good company to be up there with the Ravens, Eagles, Niners, Lions, and Cowboys. Those are all among the best teams in football. 3 of those teams. Many of those teams obviously have been a conference championship game. Sorry, I was trying to do math in my head there. But, the Niners and Lions been in the NFC championship game. The Niners and Eagles have been to a Super Bowl in the last 2 years. The Ravens had the best record in football last season, hosted the AFC championship game. So that's pretty good company to be in. Like you said, obviously the key for 2024 is they got to be able to protect the football better. But obviously when you're playing from in front, it's much easier to play kind of complementary game that seems like Kevin Stefanski wants to play on offense, where you can throw and run and not kind of put yourself into a hole where you have to throw all the time, and when you kind of have to abandon the run game. When you're playing from in front, it allows you to be creative as a play caller, and that's where I think Kevin Stefanski shines, especially like we said, how he starts games has been a pretty consistent trait of his that stands out.
Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com, and I'm going to step aside, take a quick time out. On the side of the break, we'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
Can you believe this new $1,000 tax-free scratch-off? $18,000, $1,000 winners? Another winner? Good thing I brought my check writing pens. You know what else is winning? My carpal tunnel syndrome. Wouldn't it be great for these guys if they could cash their tickets in online?
They can, with the Ohio Lottery app.
What? That's great! Wait, what's an app?
Attention shoppers, the Ohio Lottery's $1,000 tax-free $20 scratch-off is your best chance ever to win $1,000. And yes, you can cash it in online.
We continue talking Browns with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer and cleveland.com. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hi, Dave. How you doing today? I wanted to talk about Myles Garrett. Now, Myles, we've seen when he's been mic'd up, he's being held, he's being double teamed, sometimes triple teamed. No wonder Myles tailor off at the end of the season. Another subject I wanted to talk about, I liked a couple of receivers at the end of the roster. Matt Landers and Michael Wood seem like he's kind of come through pretty well. And I also like the young tight end that could possibly replace Harrison Bryant or that Trey Creighton. Well, all right, that's all I have for you today. Hopefully, again, you're having a great day. And thanks again, Dave, for taking my call.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Tim, that's a valid point. Double and triple teamed. When you do that, that takes a lot out of you physically, and you're probably seeing the cumulative effect. It's going to be tough for any young receiver to make this. They're back heavy with young wide receivers, as you have to, because you're going to sort them out, and somebody's going to fight their way and earn a spot or two.
Yeah, I mean, starting with Myles Garrett, obviously, there's a truth to just being there's so much focus on him that there's so much attention offenses have to pay to him. That's why I think that played a large part to him winning Defensive Player of the Year, even though he wasn't the league leader in sacks and pressures and those sorts of, and tackles for loss and those different metrics. It's because he impacts the game because of his presence. He still gets a lot of sacks, but offenses seem like they're so willing to focus on him that they're daring the rest of the Browns defense to beat them one-on-one. And that's where I think we talked about it last week or maybe even the week prior that, you guys see guys like Zadarius Smith, Obo Okoronkwo, Alex Wright start to finish those sacks and, turn those pressures into sacks and help Myles Garrett out a little bit and make offenses pay for paying so much attention to Myles Garrett that they forget about the rest of the defensive end group, and especially whatever they can get out of defensive tackle in the pass rush in the future and transition over receiver, even just looking at the depth chart right now. Obviously, you have Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore as your top three guys, and then Cedric Tillman, David Bell, Jamari Thrash, your fifth-round pick. That's already 6, so it's going to be extremely tough for anybody to crack the roster. Matt Landers was an interesting player coming out of Arkansas. Obviously, tremendous size at 6'4", 200 pounds. So there's interesting tools with his game, but I just feel like it's so tough for him to crack the roster. Maybe Michael Woods is a better chance because he's been with this team the last couple of seasons. He is a former Andrew Berry draft pick, showed a couple flashes in his rookie season in 2022, a couple moments, but there's in the NFL where there's a 53-man roster, there's only so many spots available while accounting for other positions on this roster. So you can't keep everybody. That's just the unfortunate reality of pro football is you're going to have to make some of these cuts, and maybe a receiver, there's just not enough room for certain guys.
All right, this one from CBS Sports. They ranked the top 20 linebackers in the NFL for 2024. Fred Warner 1, Roquan Smith 2, Demario Davis 3. They have Dre Greenlaw of the Niners 13, Tremon Edmonds of the Bears 14, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah 15. Lauded for his athleticism, Owusu-Koramoah is scary when sent as a blitzer. Expect even more from him in 2024. I get why he's ranked where he is relative to the, it was a half of a season. I think, yes, he can blitz. He's even more, he had more tackles for loss than all but I think it's 2 guys in the NFL, and those 2 guys were both edge rushers.
I mean, we talked about it before, tailor-made fit for Jim Schwartz's scheme. I mean, what JOK does best is he attacks downhill, and Jim Schwartz seemed to really tap into that. I mean, looking at his stats, 101 tackles, 72 solo tackles, which is a really good number, but then 20 for loss. And that's only just that's at only 3.5 sacks. So we're talking 16.5 tackles for loss that weren't put on quarterbacks. So we're talking chasing down running backs, even maybe receivers on jet sweeps or whatever. He was just such a disruptor in his last season. And that's why he earned a Pro Bowl nomination. I mean, he just that kind of impactful player who can make plays and attack downhill and really become a guy that even though he's a smaller linebacker, you have to know where Owusu-Koramoah is lining up because he has the ability to blow up any play just because he has an ability to get downhill and he can fly to the football. Pretty solid. He's gotten pretty solid in pass coverage too. That's an area obviously you love to see him continue to grow. But he's a young guy. I mean, he's turning 25 in November, so there's a lot of time to grow, and I'm excited I think the Browns should be excited for where he's going to continue to grow his game because he put a very strong season together in 2023, and he's still got a lot of runway to go in his career.
So this is from this is interesting. Browns pass defense kind of gives context to just how good it is, or was rather, a year ago. First in lowish completion percentage, they only allowed 57.4% completions. Second in yards passing allowed, 31.49. Tied for first in passes of 20-plus yards, only 39. First in passing first downs, given up 136. And important to note, Juan Thornhill was never really healthy. He ended up starting a couple of free agents for 2 games, rookie undrafted free agents in the secondary. And, you know, Denzel Ward missed games. Greg Newsome missed games. So what that shows you is they kind of, it was the system, and they identified players that could fit within the system. That's the sign of a good front office and a good coaching staff.
Yeah, that's certainly been where Andrew Berry has kind of made his money, I think, as a GM, is getting those pieces to work in the secondary. Obviously, you talked about the Anthony Bell and Ronnie Hickman, each having big moments to step up for guys like Juan Thornhill and Grant Delpit being out at the end of the season. D'Anthony Bell had that pass break, that play on against Darnell Mooney, where Mooney almost caught that Hail Mary, but then Bell picked it off to end the game. And then Ronnie Hickman had that pick 6 against the Jets in that Thursday night game that kind of helped spark the blowout a little bit. And obviously those 2 guys, I think, deserved a lot of credit for helping to make sure the Browns maintain that strong level of play in the secondary. But then you also look at, you know, the top 3 corners. Martin Emerson missed 1 game last season. And then Greg Newsome and Denzel Ward, yeah, they missed games, but they only missed a combined 7. So, yeah, there are people talking about, you know, Denzel Ward misses games. If he only misses 3 or 4 in a long 17-game season, and yes, it's a long season, I don't think that's as concerning as maybe some people think. If he's missing 11, 12 games, and yeah, I can see where it's an issue. But if you're only missing 3 or 4 at a time, that's, I think, something that can be, you know, that's, to me, not a worry, especially considering the depth that they've had in this secondary. Plus, you know, you're coming into Cam Mitchell's 2nd season, and I think he's an interesting player because you're going to have him as a dime corner. We saw the kind of impact he had, particularly in that 4th down stop of Justin Fields against the Bears. That turned that game around. I think he's got a chance to have a nice impact as a depth option, but especially when you have those top 3 corners, you keep on the field for a vast majority of games, they're going to make it very difficult on opponents to throw on them.
Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com, and I are going to step aside one more time. We will come back and head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports4CLE, I'll be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Yes, good morning. This is Jim from Rochester. How are you guys? I just happened to see a few things on YouTube that I'm finding out is not unlike what I had already mentioned. I mentioned that you never mentioned making a Super Bowl one, and you finally did. Why? Because you heard it from me and my family. You're winning nothing with Kevin Stefanski as coach. Understand that. Nothing. Goodbye.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Tim, I guess we're just going to have to agree to disagree with Jim in Rochester because I don't think he's going anywhere for a while.
I mean, we talked about at the top of, you know, our segment was he just signed a contract extension. He's sticking around for the long haul. And when you look at Kevin Stefanski, yeah, there are some criticism of him. Sometimes he maybe gets a little too cute with his play selection, but I think as far as the playoffs, I can't really criticize him that much because you look at 2020, you're asking Baker Mayfield to keep up with Patrick Mahomes against a Steve Spagnuolo defense in Arrowhead. I know that was a limited crowd because of COVID restrictions, but you're still going up against a Steve Spagnuolo defense. And as we've seen throughout the last handful of years, he turns it up as far as a play caller in the playoffs. And then 2023 with Joe Flacco, you know, obviously going up against what CJ Stroud did. I mean, Stroud was magnificent in that game. Flacco had, it was going to be very difficult for Flacco to match up with him. And then he threw 2 pick sixes in consecutive possessions that essentially put the game out of reach. So we haven't really seen Kevin Stefanski in the playoffs with elite quarterback play. We also haven't seen him coach in a home playoff game. Remember that the Browns haven't had a home playoff game since the 90s. So we're talking, 3 full decades without a home playoff game. So I think it's hard to judge Stefanski on playoff resume again when he hasn't had that elite quarterback to work with in the playoffs. And as we know in playoff football, if you have that elite quarterback, it gives you a much better chance of success.
The other thing he was referring to is that you don't hear the Browns talk about Super Bowl. That's not uncommon. They don't talk about Super Bowl because you have to get to the playoffs, and then you focus on the playoffs before you talk about winning the Super Bowl. Nobody comes in and repeatedly talks about the Super Bowl. It's counterproductive, but be that as it may. This is from the Bleacher Report. Bargain bin free agents who can still help NFL teams. They go with offensive tackle David Bakhtiari, potential suitors, the Browns and the Chiefs. Would be worth a flyer for the Browns, who lost Jedrick Wills, Jack Conklin, DeJuan Jones to season-ending injuries last season. Wills has also failed to establish himself as top-tier left tackle, so it would behoove the Browns to see if Bakhtiari can fill that role in 2024. They also say offensive tackle Donovan Smith, potential suitors, Browns and Patriots. Given the injury uncertainty at the tackle position, Browns should have a level of interest in Smith. Cleveland could reunite him with former Buccaneers teammate and current backup quarterback Jameis Winston. They ain't doing that until they find out one of those 3 or 2 of those 3 are injured. Because right now they're trying to sort out how they're going to play 3 people they feel can start in the NFL.
Yeah, and I mean that's one of the biggest questions I have training camp. Who's going to be your 3 starting off, your 2 starting offensive tackles? I should say. We already know they have 3 starting tackles, but you can only play 2 of them at a time because you already have your interior line set. You can only have 5 linemen on the field, so it's a question. You would, like you said, you would only sign one of those guys if one of them was more banged up at the start in training camp or whatever than we thought, or suffered an injury that would take him out for extended time, and you decide you need an upgrade at the swing tackle position. And for me, I would go Donovan Smith really easily over Bakhtiari. Look at David Bakhtiari. Yeah, he had a great resume in Green Bay, 3-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro. But the last 3 seasons, he's played a combined 13 games, so just hasn't been on the field a lot. And he turns 33 later this year, so I don't know how much is left in the tank with it for him. With Donovan Smith, yeah, he hasn't been a Pro Bowler, but he's been a solid player. I mean, 136 career starts over his career. He turned 31 in June, so he's got 2 years younger on Bakhtiari. Maybe that would be the better option. I know Smith's not an elite tackle, but I see him as a solid veteran option if that's the direction you want to go down. And certainly, if you have him as your 4th offensive tackle, that's a great piece of depth. But like you said, something that I wouldn't investigate necessarily unless you absolutely had to right now.
All right, before I let you go, this is from Total Pro Sports. 1 player from every NFL team that should be traded before the start of the 2024 season. For the Browns, they say David Bell. Browns addressed their need for a number 2 wide receiver by trading for Jerry Jeudy, throw in Amari Cooper, David Njoku, Cedric Tillman. There's just not much room for David Bell on the depth chart. Bell needs a fresh start. Browns may as well clear a roster spot for another position. All that may be true. I don't know that the Browns really would do that. For David Bell hasn't produced at a level that you're going to get much in return, and he doesn't have the measurables.
Yeah, I think it's kind of I'm not trying to compare David Bell to Amari Cooper in any way. I want to make this disclaimer when I say this, but when we talk about Amari Cooper, I mentioned it's more substance over style, and I think that's kind of where David Bell is right now. There's not really a flashy athletic trait with David Bell. Kind of his game is he gets open and he gets first downs. I mean, I've talked before about the big fourth down catches he had against the Niners and the Jaguars, but David Bell's just not a flashy receiver. That's not his game. His game is just, he's just a bigger receiver, slightly bigger receiver at 6'2", who just knows how to get open and knows how to, get a couple first downs and understands where he needs to be on the football field. That's not a flashy thing, really. And I just don't know what kind of value there is for a receiver that doesn't have a flashy trade on the trade market. I think the best thing for the Browns to do is just keep him. No reason to let him go unless some team came by and offered something, a bizarrely high, asset in return for David Bell. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to move on from him. Just keep him as a depth piece. And you can certainly do worse for receiver depth, I think, than David Bell, especially going into his third pro season this year.
Yeah, I'm curious how, you say he has a knack for getting open. To me, I want to see what he does with these choice routes, because that's the type of receiver that usually thrives with those kind of routes that the Browns are reportedly going to incorporate into the offense. Tim Bielik, good stuff. As always, appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Tim.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Have a good day.
All right, Tim Bielik, make sure you check him out. Always really good stuff. Plain dealer, cleveland.com. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.